Mike is a legend in the SEAL teams. I've heard of him. I knew of him. I knew he had a book. The reason that kind of brought him into some of the spotlight is he went on target. He got separated from the stack, and he went into a room by himself, and there were three Al-Qaeda operatives in there. And he was immediately injured by a hand grenade. He lost his rifle. He drew his sidearm, and he killed the three Al-Qaeda operatives. He took 27 gunshot wounds, and as he was passing out, his own teammates got into the room, and he was saved. And he came home, and he had a whole career a whole life post-military service. And he wrote a book about resilience and surviving tough times. I mean, this is hyperbole, but viewed by many as the toughest in the world. And then he takes his life.
Welcome to Combat Story. I'm Ryan Fugit, and I served Warzone tours as an Army attack helicopter pilot and CIA officer over a 15-year career. I'm fascinated by the experiences of the elite in combat. On this show, I interview some of the best to understand what combat felt like on their front lines. This is Combat Story. Today we've got a very interesting combat story digging into the impact of a life downrange, training, and the never-ending stress that leads to what our guest, Dr. Chris Frueh, calls operator syndrome. In this episode, we get into the science behind operator syndrome, leveraging Chris's research and newest book on the subject to help change the way we understand and treat the complex set of interrelated health, psychological, and interpersonal difficulties that are common downstream outcomes of a career in military special operations. Think traumatic brain injury, anxiety, depression, PTSD, low testosterone, and a whole host of other challenges that people experience. Chris shares some of the combat stories he's heard over 30 years supporting and treating over 2,000 veterans and active duty service members, in addition to police officers, defense contractors, firefighters, first responders, and more. Chris is a clinical psychologist, professor of psychology at the University of Hawaii. He's conducted clinical trials, neuroscience research, co-authored over 300 scientific publications. He's testified before Congress, served as a paid contractor for DoD and Veterans Affairs, and written 9 novellas. We have to thank Derek Natalini, our former guest and longtime special operator with Delta Force, for connecting us with Chris, because Derek feels this research is so important to the community. With that, please enjoy this deep dive into the science and anecdotes behind what combat stories do to the body and brain with Dr. Chris Frueh. Chris, thanks so much for taking the time to share your story and others with us today.
Ryan, thank you. I'm excited to be here. Thanks.
It's been a long time in the making. We've had a couple false starts, but I thought it would be great if we could kind of start with our mutual point of contact and friend, Derek Natalini, who many of these listeners will remember, is a former Delta Force operator, recently retired, spent a lot of time in the military, particularly in some of the tougher environments, with special operations really at the elite level, and miraculously came out with a family intact, still married, which I know is not common based on a lot of your research. But I thought maybe we could start with Derek. How did you come to meet Derek Natalini?
So yeah, Derek has become a really close and good friend of mine, very valuable person that I talk to on a regular basis. I met Derek when he was working for a foundation that was helping operators. And so I had a guy, a former Air Force combat controller, who needed some specific types of treatment. And so I contacted this foundation, and the point of contact, they set up a meeting with this guy, Derek Natalini. I didn't know anything about him. And so we hop on a Zoom call, and he doesn't know me and I don't know him. And I'm telling him a little bit about the referral I'm trying to make. And it just, like, we started talking about operator syndrome, and I said, yeah, I wrote a paper. I was, the lead author on a paper titled Operator Syndrome. And he kind of put down his pen and was like, oh, and that just opened the door to what, we took care of business, of course, and got this guy what he needed, and that worked out real well. But it just started a conversation, and Derek and I talk pretty much every week now since then.
I assume there would have been something with music as a connection point here. I know Derek obviously is at the Berklee School of Music, kind of really driving hard from an education standpoint and bringing a band together. And then I thought I saw on your side, doing a little homework here, the tactical metal side of things.
Yeah.
And I was wondering
Yeah.
if there's a connection there for you two.
Well, Derek is a musician. I'm a fan. I'm a listener, a music listener. But so yes, we bonded over some music and we talk music all the time. I had the great privilege, the honor, really. Last night he shared four of his recorded demos with me, songs that he wrote and performed alone, just by himself, accompanied with a guitar, and they're amazing. They're phenomenal. And so yes, he's a real musician, professional. He's recording an album in a few weeks of his own written material with his band. So that's going to be exciting. And yes, he's also got a book that's coming along with that. And part of it is not just music for music's sake, but part of it is music has become for him, and I think for many others, is a passion. It's an outlet. It's a form of expression. So there's something very healthy and therapeutic about it.
I think when we get into operator syndrome, some of the stuff that I read in your paper was kind of around that sense of purpose and focus on a daily basis outside of the service. And I
Yeah,
could see it with him. Like
yeah,
that's
yeah,
probably
yeah,
something that gets him up every day. And the tribe element, because he's brought a
yes,
band together.
right, yeah. Mission, purpose, and tribe, and he's got all of those covered there. Yeah.
I thought it would be helpful if we could talk a little bit about operator syndrome to kind of set the context, but I also want to talk about how you got into this role. So I thought we could give people a taste of what operator syndrome is as they hear this and unpack it just a little bit, and then we'll dive in deeper later.
So my work with veterans, and specifically my work over the last 10 years with special operations, individuals from special operations, I've come to see, I and many others have come to see that there's a common pattern of injuries and dysfunctions, impairments in functioning. And we're not we're not easily or clearly addressing these problems with the current approach to mental health care and medicine that we have in the US. So my perspective is we need to to really look at all of the injuries and all of the functional impairments and think of them together, because they're interrelated. They affect each other. They cause each other. When one area gets worse, other areas get worse. But when one area gets better, other areas can get better. So what are these areas that I'm referring to? So really, it starts with traumatic brain injury. And I guess should say this: the experiences of an operator, training, and of course also deployment, the experiences are very extreme. The training with demolitions, breaching, hand grenades, shoulder fired rockets, a lot of things that go boom. And these things, even in a training environment, have caused massive damage to the brain because of the shock wave that emanates out and has a shearing effect, literally going through the soft tissue in the body. So it's a different type of injury from being hit on the head. An impact force causes a concussion. The shearing effects cause a different type of injury to the brain that we're just now starting to learn about. Now, we also know there's the rucking, the diving, the jumping. All of that puts profound, damage on the joints throughout the body. You have these things now. We get into the way in which this affects other parts of the system in the body, but also the surrounding social systems and functioning within different environment, different contexts. I also want to make the point that while I call it operator syndrome, and that's kind of where it started from, we can use this framework, I think, and it's relevant to soldiers, to all soldiers. And I think it's relevant to first responders who have similar experiences. So I've done quite a bit of work with law enforcement and firefighters. And so I guess I want to, part of the message that I want to lead with here early on is that what I'm about to talk about has relevance to people who are not defined as special operators. Okay, so what are these domains? So it starts with traumatic brain injury, of which there are a variety of types of injuries. Sleep disturbance, which includes sleep apnea, high rates of sleep apnea in relatively young, fit men who come out of special operations. And I think we're seeing that in aviators as well. Endocrine dysfunction. Shocking to me when I first started working with the community was the low testosterone. that is common, so common, and everything that comes with that. Then we have chronic pain, the orthopedic injuries, and headaches. We have the psychological stuff, depression, anxiety, anger, PTSD, addiction, substance abuse. Then we have the impairments to the perceptual systems in the body. So vision, hearing, balance. TBI affects balance. So a lot of guys have disequilibrium, even vertigo symptoms. We have cognitive impairments from all of these things, TBI, but also just simple depression and hormonal dysregulation causes functioning with memory and concentration, staying organized, managing impulses. Impulsivity is another problem. And then we take all of that and we go, well, how does this affect the family? Because the spouses, the children are being affected, emotional intimacy and sexual intimacy are affected. A lot of guys have difficulty with empathy. You go off to war, you come home, the things you've seen, the suffering, the death, the destruction. Sometimes it becomes very easy to become habituated to those things in a way that can seem very callous to other people. Then we have the military to civilian transition. And this is true even if you're not injured, but coming out of the military and then finding a whole new adaptation to a whole other society, the civilian society is different. The norms, the behaviors, the expectations are different. And you got to find a new way to pay the bills, a new career, a new job. That's massive. We also have to be mindful of all the toxic exposures that our soldiers are exposed to, again, both in training and overseas. And that includes heavy metals like lead. That includes the injections of different vaccines that are, the jabs that soldiers get on a regular basis. That includes the quality of air and water where they were stationed. That includes, we talk about burn pits, but burn pits are just the tip of the iceberg of things. A lot of the operators I work with have been exposed extensively to radiological, biological materials, and oftentimes things that they have no idea what was in that soup that they were, that they were in the middle of. Aviation fuel. How much aviation fuel fumes were you inhaling over the course of your own work? So these lead to respiratory illnesses, cancers, and other long-term concerns. Existential concerns is sort of the last category. So, and this is a very broad category. It means different things to different people, but just to simplify it, it could be guilt, grief, moral injury is a phrase that's often used, shame, survivor's guilt, and then the loss of mission, loss of tribe, loss of purpose. And then the last thing that I don't consider part of the syndrome, but is a possible, terrible outcome, tragic outcome downstream from all of this is suicide. And I've seen a lot of suicides in the soft community. Only one guy I've known personally, but when I talk with guys, frequently they will say, I've had 5 friends die by suicide after coming home. In my interviews with private defense contractors, very common thing for me to hear. Yeah, I know 7, 8 guys that I served with died by suicide after they came home. So anecdotally, I hear about it from every guy I talk to, and the burden of those memories and of that awareness and the grief that goes with that and the anger that goes with that. As somebody who's kind of plugged into a number of different communities, I often hear, just through the grapevine, I do some work with the SEAL Future Foundation. If a SEAL dies by suicide, usually I know about it, within it, either that day or the next day. And I usually don't know the individual, but I have 5 friends who did that kind of experience. So it's I don't want to say it's every week, but once or twice a month, I'm getting a call from somebody saying, "Hey, did you hear that? Did you hear that Mike Day shot himself? Did you hear that Vito Cali hanged himself?"
And so these collectively, outside of the suicide portion, make up the operator syndrome that
Yep.
we're going to dig into. So, look, I think one of the things, just before we dig into that, I want to spend just a little bit of time on you.
My father was a Vietnam War veteran. He served in the Air Force as a physician, not a combatant. But so I grew up as a child. I was born in 63. So by the mid 70s, as the war ended, and then we moved out of Saigon, we pulled out of Saigon. I like that was stuff that was very fresh, very real to me. That was something we had the news on in the house at night, something my father would talk about with me. So I had quite an awareness of that. My dad, for a number of years living in Columbia, Missouri, a college town, University of Missouri, he got involved with the Vietnamese community there, the expat community there. And so he was making friends. He became a mentor to a number of Vietnamese students. He helped a gentleman named Mr. Long with his dissertation. I don't even know what the dissertation was in. It wasn't medicine, but my dad helped him with the writing and the English and all of that. And in exchange, Mr. Long babysat for us. So Mr. Long was, when I was like 10 and 11, Mr. Long was the favorite babysitter. He was this really nice man who was just gentle and kind and interesting. I don't know how old he was. He was probably, I mean, he seemed like he was 100 years old to me, of course, as a 10-year-old. He was probably 30.
Yeah.
And Mr. Long, just shortly before the fall of Saigon, he went home to his wife and his kids to bring them out, to bring them to the US. And he was never seen again. He was almost certainly picked up and executed by the North Vietnamese government. So that was a gut punch to me as a child, and something that I was acutely aware of. The other relationship I had as a child that I would say is very formative, and I talk about this in the book, the Operator Syndrome book, in the introduction, was my great grandfather. My great grandfather lived to be 99 and a half, roughly. I think he died just months shy of his 100th birthday. So I was 14 when he died. And he was a veteran of the Spanish-American War. So he had literally run away from an orphanage in Michigan, lied about his age at age 16, and joined the Michigan militia, went to Cuba, was in Cuba for approximately 3 months. It was not a heavy combat experience relative to most wars, but it was an experience in survival, because logistically they had not prepared American troops very well to be there. So food was scarce. There wasn't enough medicine or medical care. So dysentery and malaria and all the mosquito-borne diseases were common. He was at the Battle of San Juan Hill, so I've heard his experience of that. Part of what he talked about was how he and some of the units at the base at the front of the hill took a lot of casualties, or took the bulk of the American casualties. And Teddy Roosevelt and his Rough Riders snuck around and went up the back of the hill and routed the Spanish defenders, from behind. And that kind of was the decisive factor in the war, and they got all the credit. And he didn't like complain about that, but there was a sort of a wry, kind of ironic, sort of acknowledgement of, we kind of did a lot of the dirty work and didn't really get attention. But believe it or not, that's not even the most phenomenal or the most salient part of his story. What happened when he came home is part of what has really stayed with me forever, or ever since. So the troops from Cuba who were brought them home from the war. Again, this was a 3-month war, essentially, low casualties, not a lot of combat, but everybody who came home was sick with mosquito-borne illnesses. We didn't know how to field an army in a tropical area at that time. So they hastily built a camp up at the top of Long Island, at Point Montauk. And they built a camp. They named it after one of the early casualties of the war. So it was Camp Willock. And Camp Willock became essentially just a staging ground. Ships came in, soldiers would disembark. If they were sick, they sent them this way, and they were all sick. They were all emaciated. They'd been malnourished for 3 months, and they were sick. And they just put them in rows of tents that had been pitched in the mud. And that became a national scandal itself. In fact, the president of the United States heard about it and went up there to see what was going on. Well, my great-grandfather's story that I got directly from him, but also has been passed down through my grandmother and other family members, is he got there he got to this camp. Willick was very sick. He believes he might not have survived, but a citizen, a civilian from New York City, a wealthy woman, came up to the camp with her butler and a horse-drawn carriage and took 5 or 6 very sick soldiers and took them home with her to New York City. And they stayed in her house for 6 to 8 weeks. I think my great-grandfather was there for 6 weeks, and she nursed them back to health. And then, because they didn't have any money, she gave them money to get train tickets home. So Mrs. Jack Bean, my book is dedicated to her and to my great-grandfather. And so there's a civilian who took it upon herself. And I don't know if this was part of a movement, like if there were others doing this, or whether this was just a one woman saying, I'm going to do something. But here's a soldier who comes back from war whose life is essentially saved by a civilian making their own independent effort. So that's my story. When I went to graduate school in clinical psychology, I wanted to be able to work with veterans.
Was there any, I mean, what a powerful story. This is so interesting. Was there any discussion with your father, having been in Vietnam, about joining the military or supporting that in some way? Just a quick word from our sponsor, Mad Rabbit, and we'll get right back to this combat story. Many of our longtime listeners will not be surprised to hear that I do not have any tattoos, but it is something I think about, and I'm often envious of some of the tattoos I see out there, especially for the guests on our show. Turns out 30% of Americans are sporting tattoos. That number jumps to 40% for folks under 35. That's a lot of ink stories walking around. This podcast is brought to you by the wizards at Mad Rabbit, who are on a mission to make tattoo aftercare not just a routine, but a ritual. What I love about Mad Rabbit, beyond that I can use it to make my own uninked skin look great, is the founding story. It was conjured up by 2 ink enthusiasts who decided that the world needed something better for tattoo care. They crafted a simple, effective, and all-natural lineup that keeps your tattoos looking sharp and vibrant, like they've just been inked. Their tattoo balm sells every 90 seconds, and it's not just for fresh ink, it breathes new life into old tattoos and caters to all skin types. Now is the time to try out Mad Rabbit. They've preserved over 3 million tattoos, and they've got an exclusive offer just for Combat Story listeners. If you go to madrabbit.com and use promo code CombatStory25, you'll receive 25% off. That's 25% off when you head to madrabbit.com/CombatStory25 and use our promo code CombatStory25. And now back to this combat story.
Yeah. So my father became very anti-war after his service. I think he had commissioned voluntarily right after he finished medical school, probably 1964. Yeah, it would have been 1964. And he commissioned and did I guess a 4-year period of service. And afterwards, he talked with me as a teenager and as a young adult a little bit. He didn't really talk much, but what he did say often was, war is terrible. War is wrong. We shouldn't be fighting. We shouldn't be having wars. I mean, a very humanitarian perspective. The idea of conscientious objector status. So as a teenager, we were part of the Quaker, the Friends community in Missouri where we lived. So my Sunday mornings, as a family, we would go to Quaker meetings, and a strong component of the Quaker faith is conscientious objection to war. And so I was raised with the idea that I could be a conscientious objector, and I didn't have to register for the draft when I turned 18. Now, that was a discussion, and it was a thought process, that I went through at that age. And I talked to some of the elders in the community, not just my own father. Um, my father never tried to discourage me from registering. He just wanted me to be able to think through it. And in the end, I did register for the draft. There was no war. I was never drafted. It never went beyond that for me. Um, but I was prepared to accept that if there was to be a war, I would be willing to serve. My father also later in life talked a little bit about the military, not so much from a war perspective, but from a one of the things he would say to me when I was in my 20s was that I just didn't have the personality to put on a uniform and follow the structure and rules of the military. Maybe he's right. I struggled with that when I worked for the VA. The rules and the regulations, keeping my mouth shut wasn't always something I did very well.
One of the items that I was reading just preparing for this was a Washington Post article that you had, I think, co-authored with somebody about the historical kind of looking beyond just Vietnam at some of the PTSD or I think more aptly suicide rates
Mm-hmm.
within the
Mm-hmm.
military and how taking a longer term perspective could be quite useful.
Yeah.
So that's interesting because you know kind of have the Spanish American War there. You've got World War II. You've got pre 9/11, and obviously you've seen a lot post 9/11.
Yeah, yeah. We working with a team of historians. I was able to do some of this. Those guys know how to get data. They know how to find historical data, stuff I didn't know how to find. So we've published a paper a few years ago looking at suicide data in the U.S. Army, so active duty, not veterans, active duty, from 1819 to 2019. So 200 years worth of data. And that data exists. And we've also done some more focused work with the suicide data from the American Civil War in the 1860s. And part of, I can summarize
Please, yeah, I found it fascinating reading
I
this
can
article.
summarize this kind of quickly, which is to say, military service is not in and of itself a risk factor for suicide in active duty soldiers. The suicide rate from the Civil War, the American Civil War, seems to have been quite a bit lower than the suicide rate of active duty soldiers during the GWAT, about a quarter of the rate. Um, for a war with far more horrific casualty numbers, you'd have a battle, 3-day battle of Gettysburg, where 50,000 people, were injured, or wounded, or killed. So what does that mean exactly? Well, I think one thing it means is that it's not combat per se that is solely driving suicide rates. And we know this from a variety of other things too, looking at more recent data on the soldiers who do die by suicide. Many of them never deployed overseas. But we forget this in a lot of our discussions, I think, of preventing veteran suicide. Another study we published, which supports this line of thinking, is we got 120 years of military suicides, and we put that on a graph with the comparative civilian suicides. And those lines are parallel. They run roughly parallel. They go up and down and across together for the most part. Veteran dips and elevations and dips tend to be a little more dramatic than the civilians. So they go up more and they go down more than the civilian rates do, but they move in parallel, roughly parallel. So I think the lesson that I take from that, and that I wish we did a better job of discussing in our veteran suicide prevention efforts, is there are societal factors that drive suicides, certainly for civilians, but probably also for veterans and soldiers. It's not all combat trauma. There are other things going on in our world.
I think one of the things that I recall from reading that was maybe it was at the Vietnam War. It changes in terms of the suicide rate within the army.
Yeah, we start to see a change in the 1960s, an increase. And so again, we could talk about what are the societal things
Yeah,
going on there. And I mean, there's many, but our society today Well, let me go back to Vietnam since you brought that up. The Vietnam War was probably one of the first wars where we as a nation really weren't supporting our soldiers. Or to say it a different way, probably the first war where there was a prominent element in civilian society that made a prominent anti-war effort. And part of that anti-war protests and such was about vilifying the soldiers who had served. So, a common theme that I would hear in a lot of my patients in the VA who are Vietnam veterans is they got abused when they came home. They were bad guys. They were baby killers. There were people at the airports that would go and protest and spit at them and throw things at them. Not that not that that was every Vietnam veteran's experience, but it was certainly an experience of a significant number. And if it didn't happen to you, you saw it on the news happening to other soldiers. So you could say, well, yeah, they would have done that same thing to me if I'd been there on that day. More recently, our society has changed radically since you and I were children. You probably like myself grew up playing outdoors and climbing trees without a whole lot of adults around watching us. Yeah. We didn't have screen time. We didn't have phones. We didn't have tablets. Didn't have laptops, or at least I didn't. I think I'm quite a bit older than you, so I should speak for myself here. But nowadays, a child, we've gone from what Jonathan Haidt, his social psychologist, has referred to as play-based childhood, and that's the kind of childhood that all mammals have, where they play. Creatures play as a way of practicing and preparing for adult life. And that means like a mother kitten plays with her kittens, and they learn how to hunt, how to eat, how to kill a prey animal, and so on. Humans learn how to climb trees and take risks. We learn how to, in a play-based childhood, we learn how to be hanging out with a bunch of other kids our similar age. And we're going to have fights and arguments and conflicts, and we learn to work those out. We never had, when I was a kid, we didn't have an adult around to do that for us. So playing with your friends meant there were going to be, hey, that ball was out of bounds. No, it wasn't. Yes, it was. And, names and maybe fists are getting thrown. And then 5 minutes later, you're all friends again and you're back to playing the game. That no longer happens very often in the main anymore. Kids, young adults, teenagers, children of ages, and now we're probably up to people well into their 30s who grew up with their screens, who grew up with Google, grew up with social media, grew up with the 24-hour news cycle, grew up with the pressure and the fear of missing out if they're not aware of what's happening at every second. And the pressure of, I'm going to post a picture of myself and my life, and man, I sure hope everybody likes it.
Yeah.
I hope I get lots of hearts and thumbs ups. And if I don't, and I'm a 13-year-old child, that affects me differently than it does, a 60-year-old guy.
Are you noticing any of that with maybe the patients or just too young for what you're working with them on at this point in time, but the younger generation, are you noticing anything like that with them?
So I would say right now, the youngest operator I've worked with is currently 30-ish.
Maybe a little on the high side still.
Maybe just a tiny bit. Although those guys had fairly adverse childhoods. So they maybe didn't have typical childhoods of other children of that day. But I do teach college classes. So I teach undergraduates. So I see things there that I didn't see 10 years ago. The students, I don't want to say they're different from 10 years ago, but their preparation, their attitude, their understanding of what's expected has become very, very different. Their social skills, their relatability. I really like teaching. I like my students, for the most part, they're really good kids. And they have been delivered a massive shock coming into college. And so and again, a lot of exceptions, but in the main, for the most part, a 20-year-old college student today really hasn't been prepared in the same way that you or I and most of our, most prior generations were, for whatever comes with early adulthood, whether that's going into the service, going to college, taking that first job. That step into independence is much more stressful, or is received as being much more stressful today than I think it used to be.
How many veterans or service members have you worked with over time? It's a
Hmm.
very long career, not just for operator syndrome, but that kind of built up your knowledge base, starting with the VA.
Oh, okay, going all the way back. Oh gosh, 2000, 3000.
Wow. Yeah.
If we talk just about operators and include private defense contractors in there, probably about 500, roughly. And what I mean by that is people I've spoken to directly about their health and the meaningful issues related to their health, and not just one time, you know, at, at least two, three, five conversations. And I guess this piece I'll add, I have
Yeah.
worked with veterans from special operations, from Air Force, Army, Navy, Marines. I I've worked with active duty operators in at least three of those branches. I've done quite a bit of work with private defense contractors, many of whom are paramilitary, GRS, intelligence, connected. And I've worked with Canadian SOF, so a number of operators, but also given like live webinars and things to Canadian SOF.
I think the first question that I have, you described some of the elements of operator syndrome, but just for the layman in the audience here, why are we calling it a syndrome? What does that lend to it from a clinical or research perspective?
Excellent question. Thank you for asking that. So currently, I mean, all of our healthcare for all of us, it's very fragmented. If you have a sleep disorder, you go see a sleep doctor. If you have cancer, you get referred to an oncologist. If you have headaches, maybe you get referred to a neurologist. So you have a primary care provider who acts essentially as a quarterback and a triage early decision maker, but not really the one that does the diagnostics and the treatments for complex conditions. So so hold that thought. Another data point is another criticism that I have of VA and modern healthcare in general is I think we've put way over emphasis on PTSD as a psychological condition that we almost just hit that button, use it like an easy button. Oh, you were deployed, boom, PTSD. And that accounts somehow magically for all the difficulties you're having. Not getting along with your wife, that's PTSD. Drinking too much, that's PTSD. Headaches, that's stress, PTSD. I think that's been a huge mistake. And I think we've missed the boat and failed to fully understand and treat the injuries that many people have. So why is it a syndrome? The idea of these different domains is that they all go together and they're interrelated. So your traumatic brain injury is going to affect your sleep. It's going to affect your balance. It's going to affect your ability to function cognitively. It's going to maybe even cause sleep apnea. If you can't sleep well, that's going to make your cognitive functioning even worse. If you're not sleeping well, it makes it hard for your brain to heal itself. Sleep is one of the best healing factors for an injured brain. So to say to a veteran, hey, you've got PTSD and you have a TBI, we're going to send you to behavioral health and we're going to send you to this TBI clinic. And they never talk to each other. They're never coordinating what they're doing. They're not calling in and saying, listen, we need to, as a matter of routine, we need to get a blood level on testosterone and thyroid.
Just real quick, Chris, sorry, that sounds like something that you would just expect that they would coordinate. That really doesn't happen.
It doesn't happen. And that's not how we do it for anybody.
Okay. Yeah. You're right, because of the specialist. I got you. Okay.
I mean, I don't get that care. And I have that same fragmentation. I go over here for one issue, over here
Yeah.
for one issue. And if I say to my doctor over here, hey, I'm tired, I'm fatigued, that doctor, I mean, I've literally had this happen. Well, it's not the problem I'm treating you for. You should talk to the sleep doctor. I talked to the sleep doctor, and the sleep doctor says, well, it's probably related to this other problem that and so there's like, wait a minute. And I'm not blaming those individual doctors, but that's kind of where we are with medicine now today. For the syndrome, for operator syndrome or firefighter syndrome or police syndrome, whatever group we're talking about, these are occupational risks that are predictable. We know if you go through selection, if you go through training, we know if you go through the types of deployments that so many soldiers have done, that it's inevitable. You're going to have a TBI. You're going to have your sleep schedule jumbled up. You are going to have injuries to your shoulders, your back, your knees, your elbows. I mean, you just can't do the job without accruing these various injuries. I'm pretty sure there's some data out there that I don't have access to, but I've heard it cited that for a Navy SEAL, by the time they get to their first platoon as a SEAL, they already have significant TBI from the training that they've been through. And I'm quite sure that that holds across the board for all of special operations. So we know these injuries are going to occur, and we know I have a template in my head that's now in the book of if you've done these things, if you've been in these kinds of training environments, especially the more years you've done it, these are the things that we can predict you're going to struggle with. That's not to say that every operator has low testosterone, but it's pretty darn close to 80-90%.
Wow.
If we know this, if we can predict it, and if we know that low testosterone looks like depression, causes insomnia, why is that not up there at the top of the list, the low-hanging fruit? Because that's a blood test. We can draw your blood and we'll get an objective number. Now, what we do with that number and how we treat it, there are a lot of discussion points there. But the fact that we're not even asking that question has become part of the problem. So in describing all of this as a syndrome, part of the idea is to help change the way we view the injuries and to change the way we view treatments.
Am I correct in assuming, just from having read this, that TBI is one of the more outsized impact elements?
Yeah.
Maybe a good place to start as we dig in. People haven't heard this. We were talking about Natalini earlier. I've recorded something separately with him that we haven't released yet, but one of the stories that he shared just hit me hard as I was reading your paper, and it has to do with TBI. He's described his TBI as we were doing the interview, but he described one operation downrange where he put a breach on a door and they were within the minimum breach proximity, and he's getting ready to blow it. It's counting down, and his team leader jumps in front of him to take the brunt of the blast. And it was told in the spirit of kind of the love within the teams, basically, that people experience, and what you might see happen that people would never imagine. But he described it as taking this blast wave, knowing they were inside the safe distance, and just an occupational hazard. And that was just like one mission over hundreds.
Yeah.
So maybe using that as a kickoff point, could you speak to TBI in a little more depth?
Yeah, and let me even go into Derek's example. I don't know the specifics of his example, but a common perspective and a common thing that I hear over and over again is, there's the protocol of how you're supposed to breach a wall or a door. You plant the charge, you back up a certain distance, you make the announcement, you set off the detonation, and you count to 3, and then you get up and you run through the door or the hole that's been opened. Counting to 3 is not something that always happens. You breach that door, and it's almost like a race. Who's going to get there first? Who's going to be the first through that door? And if you're the last one through that door, you're the guy that counted to 3, you might get some stink eye from the other guys later on. So we have protocols. Those protocols are often disregarded in the moment. And of course, I mean, in war, in that moment, getting through that door quickly matters. you're on target. Getting onto that target, the sooner you're in there, with your muzzle pointed in the right directions, the better off. So there is a tactical advantage to disregarding that safety protocol. And of course, just kind of, you think about it. We have a safety protocol for blowing shit up in war. And then killing, we're going to blow some shit up and then go in and kill some people. And we have a safety protocol for that. I mean, of course we do, but you also can appreciate that there's something ludicrous about that at the same time. So TBI, let's start with this. What injures our brain? And the thing that I have always learned about and always known about is concussions. Concussions, bad. Concussions are caused by impact forces. So that's being a lineman in a football game. That's falling off a horse and hitting your head. That's falling off a ladder and hitting your head. That's being a boxer and getting punched multiple times in the head. So we've long known that concussions are not good for us, that they can make us very sick, like vomiting, nauseousness, irritability, anxiety kinds of symptoms, insomnia that can persist for days, weeks. A concussion is literally a bruise on the brain. That's what an impact blow does. And then probably more recently, the last 20 years or so, we've really kind of learned that there is a pattern of injury in the brain that is accumulative. So multiple punches make a boxer punch drunk. That's the old phrase, oh, he's punch drunk, meaning he seems like he's a little bit drunk. He doesn't have very good balance. He stumbles. He slurs his words. It's hard to understand what he's saying. His cognitive functioning isn't very well. Maybe he has tremors. Those have become accepted outcomes or understood outcomes of multiple concussions accrued over time. And then we learned about 15 years ago from Bennett Amalu's research that concussions lead to something in the brain that we never knew was there, but now he discovered this pattern of tau proteins that build up in the brain, and he named that chronic traumatic encephalopathy. Somebody made a movie about Dr. Amalu. Will Smith played him in the movie Concussion. This was just one guy who worked as a pathologist. He was taking brains home. At the end of the day, he would take brains home and working on them in his kitchen. He was doing the histology slices and looking and staining them and looking at them under microscopes in his kitchen. And he found this pattern. Now others have replicated this. Daniel Pearl, a pathologist at Walter Reed, has replicated this. He was doing a lot of the same work with operators. Didn't quite find as much in the way of tau proteins buildup. He started experimenting with different types of stains, and he found something completely new and different that he believes, and we believe now is related to the blast exposures that I talked about. So a different type of injury. It's not a bruise on the brain. It's a shearing force that goes through the brain, goes through all the other soft tissue as well. That detonation, that guy that jumped in front of Derek Natalini on the way to the target would have felt this wave that would have felt like a blast of air in one sense, but it could knock you down, but it goes through you as that shearing effect. And so what Dr. Pearl discovered in his similar types of experiments studies where he was looking at postmortem brains, making slides and staining them and looking at them under microscopes, what he found was a pattern of scarring in the glial cells. The glial cells are the support cells in our nervous system. So neurons are the messenger cells. They're the ones that send the messages up and down throughout the body. They're the ones that neurons are where neurotransmitters work. But the glial cells are essentially the scaffolding and the insulation and the cleanup system. So for every neuron, there's 10 glial cells. And those glial cells hold the neurons in place. They insulate and protect the neurons, and they carry out the toxic waste material that develops. So they're very important. What Pearl found was those get scarred And the name for that now is I think we're still moving the names around, but the name initially was interface astroglial scarring because it looks like a scarring pattern. So a very different type of injury. And then you get into the other things. These are things that affect the brain that are in the air. So being deprived of oxygen, being exposed to smoke or chemicals that are burning and are in the air. So now think about a firefighter, the kinds of exposures that firefighters get a lot of. They get TBIs from impact forces, but they'll also get TBIs from the shit they breathe that's in the air, that's in the fire.
And Chris, are you saying that also impacts the same part of the brain as a result?
I'm just saying that the toxic exposures affect the brain, not necessarily
Yeah.
part of the brain, but they're going to have effects on the central nervous system. How many times did you get choked out?
Yeah, I was just thinking, some of these stories choked out and then guys in pools, going through and just blacking out underwater and being
Yeah,
resuscitated
yeah,
and you do not want to be the guy who fails out of that course. So you're going to go back in the next day or whenever they clear you again.
right. Yeah. I often ask guys, how many times have you lost consciousness from due to some event? And I'll often get it, never. And then I'll give them ever drown or near drown or be unconscious in a pool or in the water. Oh yeah,
Oh, of course.
yeah, 4 or 5 times. Yeah, like it's not even top of mind. How many times were you choked out in combatives? Oh, yeah, I hadn't thought of that. Yeah, maybe 4 or 5 times. How many times did you have a concussion? I never had a concussion. How many times did you get your bell rung to the extent that you felt sick, but you didn't raise your hand? You didn't take a knee. You didn't have time to stop whatever you were doing in the moment. And most guys will be like, "Oh yeah, a lot." So we're talking about a lot of brain damage, and I think part of the problem with that we're seeing, that we've been seeing in the VA, is to diagnose a TBI. Oftentimes, the VA asks people, "Well, is it documented in your military service records that you were blown up and were unconscious for some period of time?" And if you weren't, then the outcome is often nope. Then it's not a TBI. But if you have a neurologist doing that evaluation and they drill down and ask the right questions, and I think more and more we're becoming more well aware of the role of blast exposures. So I think this is slowly starting to change, but we have so many people with TBIs that have not been diagnosed with TBI.
It's not something that you can get obviously from blood work or some type of other examination as proof.
Well, no, we don't have a clear, simple, objective measure of it, which is part of the problem as well. We diagnose a TBI in a variety, pulling together data from a variety of sources, and historical interviews, such as the one I just described, is a big part of it. Just going through and asking people about their experiences. We can do neuropsychological testing, so like an IQ test that involves testing of your ability to handle challenges related to memory and concentration and organization. So we can get a sense there.
Yeah.
Neurologists, they do their evaluations, and they might use neuroimaging. We can get a little data from neuroimaging, but not really enough. We can't just do a neuroimage and say, okay, now give that off to somebody and read it like an X-ray and make a decision. Is it a broken bone or not? It's not. It's just they're just not that clear.
How does TBI present? Like what would a family member notice or the service member or veteran themselves? I don't know who tends to notice it first, but I've been surprised from what I've heard on the show from folks, and they describe it as a something related to TBI, but maybe it's broader and it's part of the whole syndrome, but they'll describe it as TBI often.
TBI can cause a lot of different things, and it doesn't affect everybody the same way. Some people with TBI, with a TBI history, common symptoms: headaches, cognitive impairments, balance impairments are common. Some people have the slurring of the words. Some people have tinnitus is not caused. Let me say, tinnitus itself could happen to anybody without a TBI. But if you have tinnitus, then we have to ask, were you around blast exposures? So it could be a marker of the experiences that could lead to TBI. TBI affects hormones. So do you have do we have a blood draw, and do you have low low testosterone or changes to other hormones. And again, those could be caused by other things, or they could be caused, but they could also be caused by TBI. So at some point, part of the diagnosis of TBI is just looking for, does somebody have a collection of a bunch of these different things? And if they do, then we might then we're worried about TBI. There's a really classic monograph that was published in 2020, a few months after our paper, and the title of this is "Modern Warfare Destroys Brains." It was written by two Army officers who were doing a year-long program at Harvard as part of their service. And so they really nicely go through the research that existed in 2020 and summarize it. And it does seem to be the signature injury of modern warfare, because we do so much with things that go boom.
Have you noticed changes based on this research within service? Obviously, in warfare, there are certain things you're just going to continue to do, but within training, I would imagine there's a way to adjust.
I know that some units, and I think Naval Special Warfare may have been doing a lot of this, where they were using during all training activities, soldiers were wearing PSI gauges, so that we could track, so that it could be tracked how much blast exposures had they been exposed to, and not just not in that one blast, but over the course of the day. So in a cumulative measure, maybe even over the course of multiple days. And there was even talk, and I have no idea what happened with this, but there was talk at NSW, at Naval Special Warfare, of developing the equivalent of dive tables. So we have tables that, if you've been down at this depth for this period of time, this is kind of these are the metrics for how fast to come up and how long you should wait before you dive again, and things like that. I mean, I don't even understand really myself what these things are, but the idea of blast gauges would be to develop something like that. Okay, you fired 3 shoulder-fired rockets today, and that's too much. So you're going to take the next 2 days off, and you're not going to do anything but sleep and rest and relax. And then on next Friday, you can come back and shoot some more Carl Gustavs. I don't know if we are going to get to that point, but that's an idea that's out there.
Gosh, I just have the utmost respect for that operator community, and I've just seen over time. I know Mike Sorelli, I think, gave you was a forward in one of the books, or on the back jacket.
He's on the top. He's up at the top
cover.
Yeah.
And how can you not respect that guy and everything he's done and continues to do? But just talking to him, he was describing when he was in Dev Crew, going out and meeting with thought leaders in different areas, and I just feel like they're so good at bringing back the lessons learned from research and applying that. So I'd have to imagine they're doing this. Maybe that's just my hope, but from what I've talked to folks like Mike, you get the idea that they're skilled at this.
But then you also have to think, what is the job of an operator or a soldier or a responder? It's functioning in a highly unpredictable, dangerous environment, a VUCA environment, and you're problem solving in real time, and you got to problem solve fast. In that pool, you don't have a long time to figure out how to keep your chin above water when your ankles and your hands are tied behind your back.
Yeah.
And once you have a TBI, it's harder to learn new things. Now apply that to a soldier who is transitioning out of the military. Got to learn a whole new culture, whole new habits, whole new way of kind of presenting and carrying yourself. You got to learn maybe a new skill set, a new job, a new profession. And you're trying to do all of that while your intellectual cognitive functioning is impaired. We do so much in medicine that's benchmarked against general population, the whole Gen Pop benchmark. So a guy comes to me, and he's a former pipe hitter, and he says, well, I got my testosterone checked, and it was 350. And the doctor told me they don't treat it below 3 unless it's below 300. So I'm technically in the normal range at 350. But that's being compared to Gen Pop. What was that pipe hitter when he was 18, when he enlisted or commissioned? What was what was his testosterone at that time? My guess is it was probably different from Gen Pop. And so we're not even necessarily making good comparisons. And here's another one I get a lot. Guys tell me I can't function cognitively like I used to, but when I got tested, they told me I was great. I was fine. Here's a real life situation. We tested a guy, a real pipe hitter, probably this was some years ago. He was doing really poorly in life and from a functional. He was super depressed. He was suicidal. Um, he was having trouble. His testosterone was low. He wasn't sleeping. He was just hurt in a world of hurt. And when they did and it was a colleague of mine, a friend of mine that did the psych testing and found that his IQ measured at the 86th percentile. That's a high IQ. He's fine. He's above average. He's way above average. Now, my colleague, my neuropsychologist colleague, was able to put this into perspective. But this is kind of illustrates a point. Many guys go and they get this done, guys and gals, and they're told, "Wow, you're well above average. So there's nothing we're going to do for you. Your IQ is at the 86th percentile." He came back a year later. This is the punchline. He came back 12 months later and was retested. And this was after his depression was under control, after he was sleeping better, after his testosterone was in a healthier range. So he's a year into treatment and he's doing really well now. Retest him, and his IQ is now very close to the 100th percentile.
What?
Yeah. So we saw he went from 86th percentile to, I think, 97th percentile. So treatment helped restore his cognitive functioning. But he was disadvantaged, could have been disadvantaged from the beginning by if he'd been somewhere else where they would have said, "Oh, look at you, your IQ's at the 86th percentile. We don't need to help you because you're fine."
I didn't know that could happen. That your IQ could adjust based on those. It makes total sense.
Yeah. Well, it was an awesome thing to see and to find. And I always remember this now because I've seen it in other ways, maybe not measured as neatly as objectively, but you see guys recover their functioning in so many ways. And that's the message of hope. I hope that I want to impart here is we have treatments, we have strategies. We're seeing guys and gals not just get better, but get much, much, much better.
One of the things that struck me with the study that might be surprising to people is that PTSD in this cohort, right, in the operator community, wasn't as, and please fact check me, it wasn't as prevalent as some of the other underlying factors or what people might assume.
That's right. Well, let's break down what is PTSD. Let's do that a little bit. PTSD used to be, it was added to the psychiatric nomenclature in 1980. And we've revised the criterion twice since then. Each time we've done a new edition of the Diagnostic Statistical Manual for Psychiatric Disorders, we've revised the criteria a little bit. So 1980 was when PTSD first came into existence as an official diagnosis, psychiatric disorder. And it was primarily an anxiety disorder. It was classified as an anxiety disorder. And the core features of the disorder were fear, reactivity, and avoidance. Somebody with PTSD is going to react fearfully, physiologically and emotionally, to cues and reminders of their trauma. And they're going to avoid things that would remind them of their trauma. We've continued to revise the diagnostic criteria. So now we've added a lot of symptoms of anxiety, a lot of symptoms of depression. And operators have depression and anxiety, so they might score high on a PTSD scale, but they're not showing the fear reactivity and they're not showing the avoidance.
That's the part that I think is probably what most of the general population would assume you would have in this cohort is jumping under desks, startled, the avoidance side.
And there is some of the jumping under desks. That is an ingrained reflex that happens. But get a bunch of guys and say, "Hey, we can go shooting this weekend." Guys want to do that. "Hey, we have an opportunity to go skydiving this weekend." Guys want to do that. We're going to go hog hunting. I have a lot of friends that go hog hunting from helicopters in Texas. The SEAL Future Foundation had a fundraiser last week. I wasn't able to get there in South Carolina, but they had all the toys. They had a shoot house. It was both donors and family members and operators, and everybody had fun. Everybody I've talked to, so it was just an incredible blast to be there, shooting and running and moving. They have a vehicle rollover training thing where you get in the vehicle and somebody cranks it like it's on like a rotisserie. It's like a rotisserie chicken. So an operator friend of mine, a former SEAL, did it with his teenage son. They got in the vehicle and other guys cranked this thing around. They roll it about 5 times, leave it upside down, and you get out and you do something. That's a training thing, and they loved it. Like there's not the avoidance.
You know, I just want to jump to a couple of the ones that really stuck with me as I was looking through this. And I don't know if I don't think I have TBI. Like, I grew up playing football. I definitely had the concussions. I've flown, but I haven't been around breaches and that sort of thing. So I don't see myself as having TBI, but a couple of these really stuck with me. One was discounting the future.
Mm.
Could you speak to that one just a bit?
So now we're talking about existential
Yeah.
concerns and issues. Yeah. So um, we all have our perspective on the future, and we do things to prepare for the future, such as investing. I have money pulled out of my paycheck every month. I don't even think about it. My employer does that. It goes into like a 401 or something like that. So that's planning for the future. That's there for the future. I don't need that money today. I can't spend that money today. If I think I'm going to die tomorrow, I'm not thinking about my life in 40 years. If I'm a soldier in a combat zone, it's perfectly natural and normal to do what economists call discounting the future, which means the future may not be here, so it doesn't have the value to me that it might have to somebody else. If I have an illness and I'm only expected to live for 5 years, I'm not going to worry about setting money aside for 20 years from now. I'm not going to worry about taking certain steps, for for some future that I'm not likely to be around. And of course, you put a platoon or a company or a battalion into a combat zone. Of course, you don't expect everybody's going to die, but you also don't expect everybody's going to come home. When you talk to people who served in the military and have been to war zones, and especially for folks that are at the tip of the spear, and especially for folks who have been doing it for 15 or 20 or more years, it can be very hard to have much of a mindset and a mentality about the future. And so that changes your habits today, makes it easier to drink more. One thing that's plagued armies forever has been sexually transmitted diseases. And then you can wonder, well, why does an army marching through a foreign country, let's just take Napoleon's army marching through other parts of Europe, why wouldn't they be more careful not to get a sexually transmitted disease? Well, why would they? Live for the moment, drink the wine, have the fun, have the parties that you can have in the moment, because tomorrow might not be here. But then if you survive the war, you come home from the war, you may have, you may have implications from that. Ways in which your marriage may not be so strong, ways in which your financial position may not be so strong, and certainly ways in which your health may not be so strong.
I think almost everybody I've interviewed, and I don't ask this question every time, but it tends to come up, is just this moment in their career when they realize they're no longer invincible. And it's usually somebody else dies or they get hit pretty hard with something or they watch something happen.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I'm sure it's a cumulative effect of seeing it, but
Mm-hmm.
most folks can pinpoint one of these moments where it starts.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it kind of changes your perspective on the future.
Yeah. But even, yeah. So as a young person, you feel invincible. So you're not necessarily thinking about the future. And then when you realize your mortality, you may think about the future, but if your future is not going to be there, that's still going to affect you. one thing that, that I heard, this is from a spouse who was angry at her husband, having trouble with her husband. He just retired and he's home. And now they're dealing with all the implications of the last 20 years. And she says, do you realize she said this to him in a conversation I was a part of. She said, you realize I have helped plan your funeral 15 times, or whatever the number was. Every deployment, I was part of planning your funeral, part of planning and preparing for you not to come home, knowing that there was a significant possibility each time that you might not come home, and the implications that has had on me and the children and our family decisions that we've been making.
And for people who are listening, I mean, that's part of your pre-deployment, is going through who's going to be carrying your casket, like what do you want as you're doing your will and everything to prepare.
Mm-hmm.
It's a very real part of the experience that probably gets overlooked quite a bit. And I still remember doing it myself, and it's surreal at the time. The other one that really stuck with me was the fear of being next. So having these friends who have maybe taken their own lives, or somebody you know, and then thinking, wow, I had a very similar experience to that person. When is my clock going to run out?
Yeah. Yeah. So probably tell a story is the best way to illustrate that. So was at having a conversation and it was actually at an event, and they were presenting on about the death several years earlier, the suicide death of a Navy SEAL who had shot himself in the chest, Dave Collins, and his widow, Jennifer, was there at in the conversation. And so she was describing what she had seen in him in the days and weeks before his death. And he had intentionally shot himself in the chest, she thinks, so that his brain could be studied. And in fact, his brain was used in one of the early papers by Daniel Pearl. And so she's describing, well, what was he like? Well, he was angry a lot. He was confused. He had trouble keeping track of things. He was often just kind of confused and a little bit out of it at times. Now, there's two other guys at the table who served with him, knew him, and what they both said is, wow, Dave was the man. Dave was the star of all of us. We all admired him. We looked up to him. He was a mentor to us, even though we were, peers. He was the guy we all thought of as being, the rock solid person among us. And to hear that he had these problems that led him to take his own life, if that could happen to him, what chance do I have? And I did the same training and the same deployments and the same experiences. And of course, you have the conversation and you talk about individual differences, and everybody's different. Even the angles, one blast, you and I are standing there and there's a blast, it's going to hit us at different angles. And so who knows what the differences are, but it's scary. Another recent, very prominent suicide was Mike Day. Mike Day shot himself. I think it was last year. I never knew Mr. Day, so I don't want to pretend like I don't want anybody to get that impression. But Mike is a legend in the SEAL teams. I've heard of him. I knew of him. I knew he had a book. He was famous for going on target. I mean, not famous, but the reason that kind of brought him into some of the spotlight is he went on target. He got separated from the stack, and he went into a room by himself, and there were three Al-Qaeda operatives in there. And he was immediately injured by a hand grenade. He lost his rifle. He drew his sidearm, and he killed the three Al-Qaeda operatives. He took 27 gunshot wounds and a grenade shrapnel wound. And as he was passing out, his own teammates got into the room, and he was saved. And he lived. And he came home, and he had a whole career a whole life post military service. And he wrote a book about resilience and surviving tough times. Here's the toughest guy this is hyperbole, but viewed by many as the toughest guy in the world. And then he takes his life one day.
Anyone that knows him must think if it could happen to him.
And anybody who read his book, and anybody who heard about his service. So yeah, that's demoralizing.
In the research over time for yourself, what has come to surprise you the most?
Oh, early on, 10 years ago, I thought, I was still of the mindset that PTSD was the real problem here. And I learned very quickly it was not the real problem or not the focus of the problem. What surprised me the most was discovering how all these guys who were in their mid to late 30s had low testosterone.
Is
That was,
that linked to one element of the syndrome, Chris, or no?
I think the low testosterone is probably multifactorial. I think it's probably caused by years of blast exposures and concussions, years of night work and shifting time zones, and years of sleep deprivation. That high op tempo, even on training, I think just keeps
Yeah.
the cortisol and the stress hormones up. And I think that has an effect on the hormones, on the other hormones.
You mentioned working with Canadian Soft, and I'm just curious, beyond who you've worked with, but just in the research or the community that you're a part of, the research community or the clinical side, do we see similarities with, the Brits, the Aussies,
Yeah.
non English speaking
Oh yeah.
countries?
Oh yeah. 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 Oh yeah. Yeah. The uh the conversations I have with Canadian soft are the exact same conversations I have with US soft. I don't have much direct experience with British or Polish or Australian or other countries, but I do get emails. I get emails from once in a maybe once a month from somebody in another country who saw a podcast or who read the paper, and they're writing to let me know they have all the same issues. And I have done evaluations, forensic evaluations of private defense contractors who were Brits, Somalis, Australians, Filipinos, Ugandans, Afghanis, Iraqis, and they have, if they were trigger pullers, they have the same kinds of injuries.
How about women in this context? Obviously, the operator community is men primarily, but I'm sure, I guess, as you were describing some of the TBI, I'm thinking about artillery and
Yeah,
some like being around that has got
yeah,
to have some type
yeah,
of an impact.
yes, yes.
What's been the experience there?
So personally, I have very little experience with female operators. Um, Friends with Lisa Jaster, who
Yep,
is a female
we've had her on as well.
ranger. Oh, cool. Okay,
Yeah.
yeah, Lisa's an awesome person. One of the first females to complete ranger training. But I really don't know female operators. I do know a few female intelligence officers, um, and some of the same injuries, not the TBI injury, not the chronic joint injuries because of the nature of their work. Um, I never knew Shannon Kent, but I know a lot of people who did know her and worked with her. Shannon, Miss Kent, Mrs. Kent was an operator who was killed in a suicide bombing in Syria a few years ago, along with several other operators. So I know of her through people who worked closely with her. Um, in terms of the operator syndrome and how that plays out for female operators, I really don't know. I really don't know because I just don't have that experience. I was talking with a fellow named Sean Rosario, who's a SEAL who has a foundation, Warrior Health Foundation. And that's a foundation that helps operators with hormones. That's kind of all they do, their specialty. So if you think you have hormonal issues, you can reach out to Warrior Health Foundation and they will get you set up to get tested. And then when the test results come back, they've got a medical team that then will talk with you and advise you and help develop and pay for a plan to get your hormones healthier, which might mean hormonal replacement therapy, but usually it means other things are tried first. Okay, so had breakfast with Sean in South Florida last month, and I asked him, what are you seeing like with females? So we talked about females, and what he said is, well, he's got hundreds of males that have come through. He said they've only had 5 females come through, but those 5 all had hormonal problems
Interesting.
very clearly, and it was low estrogen. Guys seem to get low testosterone. Low testosterone women seem to get low estrogen, but that's a sample size of 5.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't want to make too much of it, but I think it would be fair to assume until proven otherwise that there's hormonal injury to females as well.
A lot of the factors that we've described obviously have a physical impact hitting the body or stress induced from some type of physical constraint, lack of sleep, blacking out. I guess I'm just selfishly curious about the intel community, having sat on both sides, the military and the
Yeah.
intel,
Yeah.
not the GRS side that's pulling the trigger perhaps, but just the intel operative. Would you see some of these underlying conditions or symptoms perhaps?
Well, you're going into high threat environments. So you're in constant danger or frequent
Yes.
episodes of danger. You are working at night, so you're under high stress. You're probably moving quickly in terms of solving one problem and then taking that as a lead, and you know
Yep.
moving on to the next problem that leads to. So high op tempo, high stress, high danger, not getting enough sleep, maybe shift sleep. How do you come down at the end of the day? How do you come down at the end of a deployment? Pretty easy to get into using
Yeah.
stimulants to get up, and alcohol or other things to kind of help calm down afterwards.
And actually, that's almost, I wouldn't say it's encouraged, but it's part of the job, depending on who you have to meet and socialize with. Like you do
Yeah,
around a lot of this
yeah, yeah,
frequently. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. That's another piece of it. Time away, you're away from your family. Again, you don't know if you're coming home. There's certainly traumatic experiences that you're seeing and
Yep.
learning and being a part of. I mean, I'm going to go general here, but this is kind of a real. I mean, this is a real thing. Witnessing something on ISR, seeing a
Yeah.
live footage of a terrorist beheading a captive. That happens, and
Yeah.
and how can that not have a powerful effect on you? And before we go, well, that would just cause PTSD. It might, but if it's affecting your sleep and it's affecting your hormones, now we're talking about physiological injuries. And so part of my criticism of my own field, the mental health field, is we've put the psycho part forward, the psychobabble, psychotherapy part forward, and we've conceptualized PTSD and depression as internal disorders that are kind of separate from the rest of medicine. Whereas what I think is we need to reverse that foreground and background and bring the physiological forward. If you have, even let me just take one of my college students with depression and anxiety. If I'm coaching that college student to wellness, I'm going to put an emphasis on, good sleep habits, good exercise habits, the right kind of dietary habits, relaxation habits, finding that meaning and purpose, and tribe, helping them find that. Right there, I think we've taken care of probably 50 to 90% of what we otherwise might be thinking of as just simply depression.
I noticed you've written on some of, you've got some articles, Men's Health, Men's Journal, I think, just kind of about the workout routine, some routines to build up muscle mass and the training side that I just wasn't expecting until I was preparing for this.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I've written some essays for Men's Journal. Most of that material is also in the second half of the book. So, for example, we know that taking an anti-inflammatory lifestyle approach, chronic systemic inflammation, which refers to an immune response that gets into our bloodstream and every cell in our body, that's a driver of virtually every chronic disease, including obesity, diabetes, autoimmune disorders, cancers, depression. It certainly doesn't help an injured brain with that chronic inflammation in the brain. So anything that reduces that inflammation is beneficial. How do we reduce inflammation? Well, good sleep, the right kind of exercise, diet is probably one of the biggest things.
Hmm.
We eat just the shittiest diet
Yeah.
now. We don't eat the way our ancestors ate. We eat foods that have way too much sugar, way too many preservatives. So the anti-inflammatory diet means eating real foods, whole foods. Get rid of all the soda, all the junk food, fast food. Don't eat any of that stuff. Eat whole foods.
Hmm.
Take turmeric supplements. Turmeric is a powerful natural anti-inflammatory. Hot sauna bathing is almost miraculous in how much it reduces inflammation.
Interesting.
Um, I know a lot of guys that are putting saunas into their houses, and I strongly encourage that. I'm trying to figure out how to do that for myself out here in remote Hawaii.
Well,
Cold plunge is another one. Some guys use cold plunge. I don't think
yeah,
we've studied as much, but it may have a very similar.
for people who are struggling coming
Mhm.
out of service, whether it's first responder or the military, do you have like two or three things that you would suggest that they do? Maybe one of them is the diet side of things, but are there two or three things that you would just say, hey, I've seen this enough now. If you could do
Yeah.
this, you're going to be in a much better place.
So other than reading my book, I wrote the book for the communities to be helpful. The book is not an academic book. It's not a book I wrote for people with advanced, lots of degrees. It's a book for operators and responders and their spouses. Um, what I often tell people is to find the paper, the medical paper, the operator syndrome paper, and take that to your primary care doc. Highlight, go through it with a highlighter and take it in and have a conversation. And there's some low hanging fruit. If you're not feeling well, if you're not doing well, get a blood test for hormones. It's not expensive. Medicine does it. Insurance usually covers it. A lot of doctors will try to talk you out of it because they don't want to have to deal with a conversation about testosterone replacement. But I would absolutely do that. If you haven't had a sleep study, that's another thing to consider. Again, that's just a very simple, objective medical test that will give a lot of different types of insights into sleep. Um, and then I would go from there.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Interesting.
there's so much of the lifestyle stuff that can make a big difference.
So I had recently signed up for a sleep session, study session, and it's 4 months before I can be seen. But I'm very interested to see what'll come up with that. And I never would have guessed you would have said that. So very interesting. Um, and I guess the last thing that I'll ask you, for the 170 interviews I've done, I ask everybody the same question at the end. I'm going to try to tailor it for you, but I always ask them, looking back on this career of pain, suffering, sacrifice, challenge, would they do this again? And I guess I would ask you the same thing. Like, you could have done anything and studied whatever and gone down a path and helped any number of people, but you chose this community. And I got to imagine like you're dealing with a lot of pain and suffering on a daily basis. I was just curious if you still have hope in what you see, but would you have taken the same path knowing what you know now?
Absolutely. No question. Absolutely.
Hmm.
I feel like I have had an incredible honor, an incredible privilege that's been afforded me to be able to work with some of the finest human beings in the world. People I just admire and respect. And that's not to say that every operator or every responder or every veteran is a wonderful person. I don't want to say that, but yes, I absolutely would. I just feel personally very fortunate to have been able to do what I've been able to do. And it's just so rewarding. Uh, so I have no hesitancy to say yes on that.
Well, Chris, I'm so appreciative of the time. If people want to know more, obviously they can pick up the book. We'll have a link to it in the description. You've got the website,
ChrisFree.com. Yeah.
free.com. All right. And then Christopher Bartley, some of the novel side.
Yeah. So I do have had a sideline career as a novelist. I've published 9 novels that I would describe as novels about America in the past, seen through the eyes of of warriors of different types. And most of the books are about a guy who's actually a criminal in the 1930s. He's a bank robber, and but he's also the conscience of the stories. And so the stories are really about America and people in America and the situations and such. I did write those under a pen name. They've been published under the name Christopher Bartley. My actual name is Bartley Christopher Free. So we
Okay.
took my first 2 names and inverted them. My agent is working to republish those novels under my actual name and with new covers. So I'm hoping that by the end of this year, those will be out in a more,
Nice.
accessible form. And I have another book, another novel that's been sitting on the shelf for a few years that I hope will also be published soon.
Great. How much of that is influenced by the clinical work?
Well, that's kind of a psychodynamic-y type of question for me to answer.
Okay, fair.
So I don't know the answer, but I'm quite sure a lot.
Yeah.
I'm quite sure a lot, but also maybe there's some pre-existing issues that led or have contributed to both the writing and the other work.
Fair. Well, that's great. Thanks so much, Chris, for the time. This has been great. People can find you online, and we'll have all the links in the description here. Thanks
Thank
for
you,
the
Ron.
time.
Thank you, Ryan. This was a blast.
I hope you enjoyed that combat story with Chris. It's definitely a departure from what we typically do, but because we talk so much about the experiences people have downrange and the challenges both coming home and then transitioning out of service, we thought this would be a really important interview to help people out. And I hope, if you are a service member or a veteran or member of law enforcement and you're experiencing anything like this, please pick up the book. You can definitely reach out to Chris as well. And I hope that if you're a family member or loved one, you might be able to learn a bit here and connect possibly a little deeper or help identify something that you're seeing in your loved one or family member. With that, I would ask, just before we jump into listener comments, please take a look at our newsletter where we have what's coming up for the week, what I'm up to. For instance, just getting ready to go play airsoft with my kids, get shot up, but I'm also asking AJ, our past guest, the sniper, if he'd be in for another round of this to help me out. So we'll see how that goes. But we also have, a joke about the military, maybe, a day in military or intel history, quote that I'm thinking about, what I'm reading or watching, and just to stay connected with everybody. But with that, here, let's dive into a couple listener comments. The first are Apple Podcast 5-star reviews. The first is from former fan HK. He says, just listen to my first episode, Ryan's interview with Glenn Horn. Riveting, inspirational, and am looking forward to hear many more. And another one from Ewan Petty said, this podcast is excellent, and I totally recommend it. Thank you both. Those 5-star reviews go a long way to getting this in front of more people. And then we've got a host of comments on our interview with Medal of Honor recipient Earl Plumley. No doubt we would get quite a few comments here. I think people really appreciated this episode. And what an amazing story he had downrange when he won that Medal of Honor, when he earned it. But a few of the comments here. John Smallwood, 1657. I know we've heard from you before. He says, God bless him. That's Earl. And those like him, damn few left. This is a top 10 combat story. And I'm Awakening 3387 says, this deserves way more views than it's received. God bless you and thank you for your service, sir. And then we've got Adakorkut 5110. Sorry if I got that wrong. He says, he's absolutely right about that quote. Blood on the battlefield is thicker than water of the womb. And that was one that Earl brings up in the interview. We've all heard blood is thicker than water, but I haven't heard the full quote, and that was quite interesting. And then last but not least, Coppers Aguaro. And he says, I love Earl and his humor. Such a humble guy. I've listened to his story many times. Thanks, Ryan. Yeah, Earl's a very likable, approachable guy. Seems very humble. And I think just as he's transitioning out and really building up his presence online, I think we'll see a lot more from him. And he has a lot of fun with what he does, just coordinating with he and his staff. I could tell they're having a blast, and I can't wait to see what they do. So with that, thanks so much for tuning in, for staying with us. I know this one's a little bit different this time around with Dr. Frueh, but I do think it's important given what we talk about week in and week out. We've got some great ones ahead too, so stay tuned. Wherever you are in the world, whether it's a week or your weekend, stay safe, y'all.